Awesome. Welcome. I'm going to start with a question from earlier in today's session. There were still a few questions at the bottom. Uh, this one was less of a question, more of a comment that I think a lot of people can relate to. Um, I don't know if we were talking about, I don't think we were talking about hoovering exactly, but somehow somebody was talking about that situation. And this person added, they will give you just enough time to heal and then send another text. Mine was, hi, why can't I stop loving you? Geez, I ignored it. Then about 2 weeks later, photos of his son, using him to try to provoke an emotion in me. Sad person would use a child. Yeah, this is unfortunately really common. Both of those things. First of all, the hoovering that comes like just as you're like starting to get out of that and get out of the old habits and stop looking for this person, right? And like you're getting on your own and like you're healing and you're moving forward, and then suddenly the text comes through and it's something, like this person said to this other person, like, why can't I stop loving you? Like, ugh, right? So like that kind of stuff can happen. And using the child, the photos of the child, when she didn't respond to that, and then he sent photos of the child to try to get her, that will happen often too. And or photos of a pet, that either they shared because you lived together, or just like, you dated this person for a while, or you were in a relationship for a while and they had an animal, and obviously, you fell in love with the animal. It was like a big part of your life too. And then it was heartbreaking leaving the animal and, splitting up custody of the pets, and, or maybe it belonged, to the narcissist to begin with, and you just had to say goodbye. So yeah, they will try that kind of stuff. I mean, they will try anything they know will pull on your heartstrings. That's why they do the photos of the kids or the photos of the pets, or, one person, actually more than one person, several people told me they got hoovered back when like the pet died, right? Like down the road, the pet died, and then they let them know, just wanted to let you know that, the animal died, and then they get back in contact. Like one person even told me she broke a restraining order, to respond to that. And they'll catch you like that. Sometimes it's not even them. It's like their family and friends, like they're flying monkeys. And maybe the flying monkeys don't even really understand the extent of the situation. Like years ago, like 9 years ago or so, 8 or 9 years ago, I broke up with this one guy, and then like years later, his dad died, and I cut everything off. Like I wanted no more contact with him. It was so bad. Like the gaslighting after the relationship ended was so bad. He was playing really cruel tricks on my mind, like switching my license plates and stealing my mail and stuff like this. And so his sister sent me a Facebook message. We weren't friends or anything, but she looked me up years later to say that his dad died. And, she didn't know if her brother had contacted me, but, the dad always thought fondly of me and blah, blah, blah. And there was no way, like, I just said, I'm sorry, to hear about your dad, and there was no way I was going to get back in touch with him, or even like reach out and tell him, hey, I'm sorry to hear that your dad died. Cause that was going to be a trap. Like whether she consciously knew that or not, either way, that was going to go bad. So, it's really unfortunate when they use those kind of situations to try to pull you in, but it will happen. And it's best just not to answer those. Just not to answer. The really tricky part is when there's like a child that they're using, or a pet or something like that. And it's not even like the person telling you, gosh, how am I ever going to get over you? How am I ever going to get out of love with you? Or I miss the great sex we had, or whatever they use. Like that's usually easier to deal with than when they really pull the heartstrings with the kid and the pet. So yeah, those are unfortunate situations, but watch out for them because it will happen. Someone else asked me earlier, and I didn't get a chance to respond. They asked me if I'd read Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker. No, I have not, but I heard this is awesome and I want to read it. I have checked out his website, especially the work he does on the 4 Fs. Like I've mentioned before, the fight or flight state, and then there's actually 4 Fs because it's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, which are two other, some people call fawn fuck, right? Because it means like you completely become absorbed in the other person, like their will is your will, and you please them and become an extension and part of them in order, to survive. These are all possible survival strategies. And when you've been in, an abusive relationship, especially if you grew up with that, you probably tend towards one of those four states, as like your predominant survival state, but then also like you probably get triggered into that more often than most people would get triggered into a stress survival state. So it's really helpful to read that. Pete Walker, look him up online. You can see it online, the 4 F's, and he outlines it, like what each one looks like. Like he defines it and then he describes the behavior, and you could really see like kind of where you fall in there. And you might have multiple, survival strategies, but it is helpful to notice that and notice and catch yourself, when you are doing those things. I requested an interview with him a couple months ago. He's really busy working on his next book, but maybe when he's done with that, we'll be able to get him on an interview and maybe he can elaborate more on that. Someone wrote privately here. Yeah, I found that he did not get that I did not want anything to do with those who scapegoated me for years. He actually believed that I should let it go and welcome them. Are you talking about his family, like maybe his child or his other family members? Is that what you mean? Yes. Relatives of ours. Yeah. So, sometimes the person will actually stir it up to get a relative to contact you. And multiple things could be happening. Could be that their relative, their sibling or whomever could also be a narcissist looking for some fun. But quite likely they're like the codependent personality. They have no clue what's going on. They're in it, with their sibling. They don't see who the sibling is. And then they just follow along because their narcissistic sibling is like telling them to do this, contact so-and-so and do this. Or they're really manipulating them and they're putting on like, the victim thing, and so, this whole elaborate histrionic story to get that person to go ahead and reach out to you any way, shape, or form that comes. That's going to be a dangerous hook. They're narcissistic like him. Yeah. So in that case, it's probably more like fun and games for all involved except for you. And yeah, it's just best not to have any more contact, like their family, their friends, their circle. Like you might have been involved for years and years in a relationship. You might have even been married and like really gotten enmeshed into their life. And afterward, it's really tragic when it's like the collateral damage, right? It's like you lose all of those relationships. And usually that is the best way because that's their people. That's their tribe, their family, their friends. And quite likely all those people are going to be on their side. You really can't trust that any of those people are going to even want to see the truth, let alone take some sort of action, in your favor. So it's usually just best to walk away. Yeah, this person says was glad to burn those bridges. Yeah, when they're narcissists like that, just burn those bridges and don't look back. Like they say in life, not to burn bridges because you never know, what connection or whatever in the future. But to be really honest, like there are some bridges that are best torched, burnt to the ground so that you cannot go back, and that really applies in the case of addictions, like people who get out of like a heroin addiction, for example, that's a brutal one. And, when they get out and clean, like they have to burn all bridges with the friends that they used to hang out with, like anybody that was at all related to the drug, because they can't be friends with someone who's still doing it or has connection to it. Is they'll just fall back into it, or the habit of it all, or dating the same person who they used to shoot up with or something, or people who are popping, the opiate pills, extremely dangerous and extremely addictive and could even die in the withdrawal process, but sometimes what'll happen is the person gets through all the treatment and the withdrawal and they get clean. And if they don't torch those bridges, they're going to go back. Like it's just a matter of time before they go back. And, in this case of narcissistic abuse, it's much like an addiction. The substance was inside your brain, the brain drugs that were released rather than an exogenous substance that you put into your body. But either way, that person, the abuser, and all of his or her, tribe is really part of the paraphernalia, part of the addiction. And it's best just to burn all those bridges. You could be tempted back. I mean, especially with things like, you get a phone call and they're like, so-and-so is really ill. Like they've got cancer or something. And now it's like with the guilt, and so it's really just best not to have any contact. Oh, this person said, I found with the narc that he likes to keep doors ajar in case he needs supply. Yeah, they'll often do that. They'll often keep those bridges, keep the doors ajar so they can go back to the old forms of supply. It's always easier to go back to a supply that you had before because you already cultivated and groomed that person, right? Because if not, then they need to go groom a whole new person for the abuse. And it's an enormous amount of investment, I imagine, that idealization phase. Like they go all out sometimes with the love bombing and major investment of time and energy and whatnot. And I imagine they can't do that constantly. They can't just be starting over all the times. That's why they keep what they call a lobby or a harem, right? Like you keep going back in some way and they'll try to find some way in. Just don't give them that opportunity. Cut everything off, burn those bridges. Don't let them back in. Okay, while I wait for another question, I'll read this one that came via email. Actually, it came a couple weeks ago, and I'm sorry I just didn't get to it. Somebody asked me if I had any tips on how to navigate a divorce from a narc. I'm really sorry. Those are really, really challenging from what I hear. I mean, I divorced one too, but the thing was, you find out what they want. So in the case of my ex-husband, he wanted American citizenship and he was really close. Like I wanted the split and he still had another year that we had to be married in order for him to get his citizenship. So he hired the attorney. I didn't even hire a divorce attorney. We had no kids. We had no property to split up. I didn't care about any of that. I didn't want an attorney. There was nothing I was fighting for. I wasn't fighting for the money that he had saved. I didn't want his energy, but he had to hire the attorney because he needed to get his citizenship. Like that was the one thing that he wanted. And it was really important to him. So he went ahead and hired the attorney and took care of all the legal costs and everything. I didn't have to pay for the legal costs of the divorce because that was important to him. And, he was making it very, very difficult to leave until that point where like it hit the no return and he finally accepted that I was out and then the lease was ending and he had to move out too. So, in the case of divorcing an narc, one, lawyer up and get a really good lawyer and preferably someone who really understands at least domestic violence. Like if you can find someone who understands psychological abuse, emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse, that's amazing. That person hopefully will be a little more savvy into how the court is going to work. And especially if there's children involved, and how they can maneuver that to the best way, knowing, that the narc is probably going to have some tricks up their sleeve. But in terms of, how to deal with that yourself too, in addition to getting an attorney is, I would really think long and hard. What is it that your ex wants the most? What do they really want out of this, and just figure out when you know what they want, if you can find some way of working it so that they kind of get what they want, but without you compromising your boundaries or something major to you so that you can get out of that. Because I have heard so many horror stories of people trying to divorce a narcissist and the narc won't sign the papers, or they're dragging something out, or they're making ludicrous claims about this or that, or they're messing up the child custody. And like, it can be a disaster because maybe they don't want the divorce, or maybe they want to like hurt you in the process. So when you know what they want, you at least have a tool of leverage. And you know that the narcissist always wants what they want. And that's what they go for. It's like the most important thing to them. So if you can somehow show them that they're going to get what they want if they do what you want, then you've written your ticket, and then they'll be willing to go through it as long as they get what they want. And when you're in that position of trying to get that divorce, you can like fucking get free and start your life again. It's really, really stressful. And, you don't want to get to that point where you just crack. Like you just break down because you're just so desperate to get this divorce finalized and they're just jerking you around and stuff, or causing problems, or like however that goes down. So figure out what they want, figure out how to help them get that while you get what you want and need, and without compromising your boundaries, and that way, hopefully that can go as smoothly as possible. and definitely have a good lawyer, because you never know what kind of trick they have up their sleeves and what they could try in court, and preferably an attorney who understands at the very least, domestic violence. What other questions do you guys have? I think I see some new names. Hopefully you guys found the chat icon over there. You can type some questions or comments. Okay, cool. Here's one, a private message. My ex-female narcissist discarded me and said to never call her again. Then after asked me, are you okay? Every week for a month. Why did they do this? Well, that's the sick mind games that they're playing, calling just to see if you're okay, checking in on you. It sounds like concern, but there's probably one of a few things going on. One is they're getting off knowing that you're crushed or you're hurt, or maybe they just want to make sure that you're crushed and hurt and depressed and not like really happy. Because if you're really happy, then they're going to want to get involved in that somehow. And, but usually it's like the dig disguised as concern. They pretend like they're concerned and caring, but then they come in with some kind of dig towards you. And it's right when you soften into them, and that's the danger of the hoover that comes in the sweet form. Like the hoover that comes in a nasty form could be easier to ignore, because you could be like, oh God, as long as you don't get roped into the whole like wanting to fight back or argue back or defend yourself, right? But when the hoover comes in like the sweet form or the nostalgic reminiscent form, like the person mentioned earlier, like, how can I ever get over you? That kind of thing. Those can be really hard to deal with because it softens you. And they know that. Like they know, like if they say that thing that's going to soften your heart, you're going to open up. And then that's right when they can get in with a dig or something much worse could be. So it's a mind game. That's the short answer is, why did she do that? It's a mind game. If I were you, I would block her on everything, on your phone. I mean, even call your provider if you have to like blacklist that number, no text, no phone calls, no social media, block it all. Don't answer any unknown numbers or any random numbers that you don't know, or ones that come up like unknown or ID blocked or something. Just don't answer those, because it could be her. And it's just so much better not to have that contact. Every time you have that contact, even if you're like there reading it, it's triggering something. It's probably triggering that trauma bond like every time. And so it's like you do this work to get better, to get better, to get better. And then she texts you and you're like down again. You got to get back out, and then you get down again, and it's like they know they keep you there. And you never really break through. And so it's really dangerous to have any contact with them, because it's all a mind game. Someone else writes privately, I just went no contact with my ex-narc a couple of weeks ago, and I was so enmeshed in his life where we shared so many personal and intimate moments. I miss those emotional highs, but now I think he intentionally created those moments so I would be addicted to him. I fell in love with the illusion of the man I thought he was. I'm also angry about how he used me in so many ways. He used me professionally. He used me to brag to his friends. I later realized he used me to make other women jealous. I know revenge is wrong for feeling used, but can I get any satisfaction out of knowing that maybe he misses me like I miss him? I also can't help myself sometimes from peeking on his Facebook. Okay. So, first of all, peeking on the Facebook, it's not going to be good for you. Like, I know it's like the curiosity is like, you just want to see what's going on. You want to know how they're doing and like what's happening. It's so much better just not to do that. Put him on your block list, go up to your settings and then blocking, and then block that person. And it just stop yourself from that temptation of looking, because it'll trigger you back. Like, maybe you see his photo. I think it was him. Yeah. You see his photo and now you're missing him, or you see his photo and now you're like enraged, or like you see him and some new person in his life and now you're really pissed off, or like you see him passively aggressively, putting something out there intended for you to see, and now it hurts you and now you're upset. So it becomes this really negative downward spiral, and it's really better to cut that all off. That is all paraphernalia of the drug, and it's going to hook you back into that trauma bond. And, does he miss you? No, he misses the supply he got from you. He wants what he wanted, but it was just a thing. It is like an object. You can imagine, like, you really want that object or that thing. And it was just about the thing. It's not like you love the thing, it's like he just wanted what he wanted. They don't see human beings like most normal human beings see one another. Like it's not like that for them. They don't have similar forms of attachment. They usually have an attachment disorder where they can't get close to someone, and they don't allow themselves. There's something in there that blocks like the deeper, intimate human connection. You mentioned at the beginning, those intimate moments, the emotional highs, and now you think he intentionally created those moments. Yes, that's called fabrication of emotions. Jackson Mackenzie mentions this in his book, Psychopath Free. He talks about how, the psychopath, the narcissist, whomever the manipulator is, they will intentionally fabricate emotions in the target. It's like you're living this emotional thing and it's so real to you, and they're not in it at all. They're just creating this game. They're doing what they do, and they can watch you to see, are you reacting as they're expecting? And when you're reacting as they're expecting, then they know they've got you, and they know they can keep feeding that thing, whatever that thing is. And then that's the same thing they're going to turn on into value. So yeah, they fabricate that. That's what the high is. And that's what the addiction is. It's to like all the brain drugs, to that emotional high. That's what we end up looking for. That's why we get addicted to the abuse. We're not addicted to the maltreatment per se, although it might look normal. If we grew up with that, we might just be like, oh, that's how so-and-so is, or that's just how people are in relationships, because we form these belief systems growing up in narcissistically abusive families. But if you didn't grow up in that, chances are he was just fabricating those emotions in the moment, and that high just felt so good because it was distracting you from whatever pain or suffering in your life that you didn't really want to look at, whether, it was a childhood wound or a more recent wound, or some kind of loss in your life. And so that's part of the recovery is coming back to baseline, after those emotional ups and downs, and, being addicted to that cycle and stuff. And yeah, you mentioned how he used you in so many ways. Yeah, those are very typical ways that they will use a person. Like, it's just, I know it's really hard to accept, but like literally they look at another person like they're some disposable piece of garbage. Someone asked me a couple weeks ago, like, do you think she thinks about me still? And I was like, honey, how long did you think about the piece of garbage you put in the bin this morning? Not too long, probably around the same amount of time. She was already on to her next target, and she's fully enveloped in her targets, and she's getting her supplies. So no, not coming back, and you're lucky that she's not trying to hoover back. So, the reality is that they just don't see people like you see people. They don't have the intimacy, the kind of healthy attachments that normal human beings would have. And I know it really hurts to like think about them doing well after how poorly they treated you, or them with someone else after how poorly they treated you, or them, just moving up in life. It's so frustrating, which is why it's just better not to even look. Don't give yourself that temptation, because it's really hard not to look. But if you have them blocked, then it's like this whole other thing that you would have to consciously override to do, versus like the subconscious kicking in, you're like typing their name and like there they are before you even know it. Right? So if you have them blocked, then it just reminds your conscious mind, okay, they're blocked for a reason. I'm not supposed to have contact for a reason. I shouldn't be looking at him for a reason. What's that reason again? Oh, right. I want to get better. I want to thrive in life. I want to move forward in life. That's why I can't look at him. And that's the choice. It's like, do I go look and investigate and see what he's doing? Or do I choose happiness and peace in this moment and moving forward, And so like really weigh these two choices out for yourself if you catch yourself in that situation. Someone writes privately, When the narc broke me down the first time, I contacted his ex. Shortly after that, she wanted more child support from him. He accused me of telling her about his finances, which I did not, because I know she's a somatic narc. But he's convinced that I did. Now I feel they triangulated me. I didn't see it then, but now I do. They do not miss us. We are nothing but puppets in their eyes. Right. That's the temptation of wanting to talk to the exes. And just because they're an ex of your ex does not make them an ally. So like in this case, we've talked about this, that his ex is also a narcissist. She's more the somatic type, right? So that's a whole other situation, but it also could be a situation where it's like another codependent, right? But they're in the state of, they're resentful towards you because you got something they didn't get from that person, or because you're reaching some level of success or happiness or peace or healing in your life, and they're resentful and jealous about that, and how easy life is for you or something. Like, it's dangerous. It's like, it could be a validating conversation if you're on the same page, but if the other person is not on that same page, it could end up being more of a danger to you to have any contact with an ex of theirs, because you don't know what side they're playing on. And even if they're not playing on your ex's side, because they might not be, they might fully know your ex is like a psychopath or whatever, but they're so enthralled in their own game. Maybe they're another narcissist or borderline or something, or maybe just a really unhealthy codependent. Either way, that's not going to be healthy for you to move forward. It's usually just better just to step out and to stay away, and, to get that closure inside yourself versus looking for it out there. Someone says privately, yesterday in my triangulated situation, she hoovered, saying wanted to go to the beach where we would go sometimes and make love. Then later I happened upon her and her son holding hands and him consoling her, like, because I'm such an asshole. Gray rock not working gets interpreted as abuse towards her. So when I try to keep peace, the son punches me, so to speak. If I work in the relationship, he punches me. If I withdraw, they both punch me. That's called a catch-22, right? Damned if you do, damned if you don't. That's like the double bind. It's the whole relationship with the narcissist. Like, it doesn't matter which choice you pick. It's a false choice. You're screwed either way, right? So you got to go with what feels good to you. You got to go with the boundaries that make sense for you, that keep you healthy and sane and safe. And never mind their reaction. They're not going to be happy with either choice that you make. Either way, you're wrong, right? So you might as well pick the one, that makes sense for you. You might as well pick the boundaries, pick the gray rock, that sort of thing that works for you, that keeps you healthy and sane. They're not going to be happy anyway. Continues, it says, of course, I know she did this to steal the house from me. She should pay me my half and let me get out, but that is not going to happen. She conveniently forgot to sign our agreement, though she wrote it up 2005, 4 years after we were into this contract, and she had almost lost the house because she used the money to pay old bills I never knew she had. Boy, how stupid I was to forgive her and set myself up for this 10 years down the road. I'm so sorry. Yeah, that's such a shame. When you're in that situation where you share property, like a house especially, and then it's really hard to get out, and then you're depending on that person to follow through, to take the actions, like either to sell the house or to buy you out. It's kind of similar to the divorce situation. And, in that case, I would probably give you a similar advice to the person who asked about the divorce, is like, if you can figure out what it is that she wants, is there any way that you can help her kind of get what she wants while you get what you want? Like, you make some kind of barter agreement, like, okay, you can get this and I get that. And it all goes on the table at once. We're not playing that tricky game where I give you what you want and then you say, sorry, Charlie, because that happened to me with my last business partner. It was like, I gave him everything that I created, the website, like all that. And then he was supposed to pay me and he didn't pay me. And I was stupid, for not having held on to that until the money was on the table, until the money was in my account. That was my fault for trusting him, right? And so if you're trying to get out of a situation like that, where you have property and value and like you need the money out of that situation, then make sure everything is on the table. Maybe even set it up with a third party, like an attorney who's watching, that everything's on the table. Don't totally count on that person. Make sure that you're taking responsibility for your stuff too, and you're not putting your stuff out there until her stuff is there. Like, it's all there together, and then we make the swap. You get what you want, and I get what I want, and we both can go free. Because you're never going to be able to get and make any progress there unless they get what they want in some way. But don't do it in the way where like you lose everything. Instead of the zero-sum game, make it at least like pretty balanced in the win-win, where they get what they want and you get what you want. Protecting your boundaries of safety and sanity and well-being. Someone else asked, why did they keep their relationships hidden from their friends? So say you were her significant other, why would she keep you a secret from her friends? Maybe something like that. Is that what you're asking? If that's the case, I don't know. Could be that they don't want, maybe she knows some of her friends are narcissists too. And if she brings you around, they're going to find you attractive. They're going to start hitting on you or flirting with you, or maybe they try to get your phone number, or somehow they try to get into your life. And, maybe she's like really territorial about you in that way. That could be one scenario. Another scenario is, maybe she is married or has a whole other double life, and you're just the person on the side. And so, to maintain this public persona of being, this perfect person or whatever she's going for, maybe she can't admit that she's having an affair or something. Or maybe you don't meet her standards of, whatever is worthy of showing her friends and family, and you're just like one of her side, narcs. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not saying this to like hurt your feelings, but these are things that I've noticed that narcissists do. It could be down to the insecurity, where she was just insecure that her friends might see you and want to take you away from her, or take your attention away from her, because like, what if one of her friends is more pretty than her? And what if you, then you suddenly like you find her attractive or something? Like, even if you had no intention of doing anything, and even if she knows that like you're very loyal and devoted and monogamous, but like just having your attention on some other person could be enough to drive her crazy. Like, the narcissist like cannot deal with jealousy, and the jealousy to them is like, the jealousy is about like they have to win all the time. You can never win. You can never be successful. You can never be happy. You can never be the more attractive one. Like, they're always going to be jealous of that sort of thing. And that's a really toxic relationship to have someone in your life. Like, if you start to realize, and maybe this isn't even like, a long-term relationship, but if you start to notice that you have a friend in your life or something, and like, they are like pathologically jealous of something you've got going on. Maybe they even admit it, and you could just feel like the resentment and the jealousy, or they say things to you like, it's not fair. It's not fair that you're successful and I'm not, or that you got this and I didn't. And that person is really toxic. Don't hang out with people like that, because many things could happen there, but probably what's going to happen is you're going to feel guilty. You're going to be like, oh, but well, let me share. You can have, whatever. What can I do to put myself down so you can feel better about yourself? And that's just really dangerous to your self-worth and your self-esteem and your self-respect. So why did they do that? Probably many reasons. None of them, they're not up to any good. They might come up with various reasons to like give you, excuses of why they don't take you over there, but they're hiding something. In some way, they're living a double life, and they're probably wanting to be territorial of you and not let anybody else in their life get involved with you. Okay, so the person from before with the wife and the wife's son, Emotional incest. She did this to give her parasitic son the house, I think. He and I never got along from day one in our relationship because of the opposing values. Yeah, that's really gross. Yeah. So, in that situation, she's using the son to play you as well. And that's a really dangerous situation when there's multiple ones there, because they will mob. They call it mobbing, ganging up against you, even to the point where they're trying to like distort your perception of reality. That could just lead you to the point of like, you feel like you're going to lose your sanity, because when there's multiple people telling you this is what's real and you're wrong, and it's all you, see, it's all of us, and then there's you and you're on the outside, and it creates really, really devastating feelings and sensations. And so I hope that you can get out of that situation as soon as possible. Someone says here, my mom is NPD borderline. I'm the scapegoat and oldest. My younger sis is the golden child, and I just told her about my realization about our mom. She seemed understanding, but now is somewhat distant and suspect she is telling my mom everything and that I shouldn't trust her anymore. What can you tell me regarding how to proceed? Yeah, I'm really sorry. So, it's the scapegoat is usually the one who realizes what's going on before the golden child. And it sounds like it was just you two. Did you want to talk? Is that your voice? Okay, I just heard some noise in the background. I thought maybe you wanted to speak. So, so it's harder for the golden child to see if the golden child didn't endure any abuse. If you can remember back, to childhood, if you can remember any times when maybe your mom flipped the thing, like she was triangulating you two, and for some reason your sister didn't submit or didn't comply, and so she got the wrath, she got the scapegoat, and then maybe your mom triangulated, and tried to like bolster you up to make her jealous, in that sort of game. Like, my mom did this game. Maybe this happened. Maybe you can think of instances like that, like where you can maybe relate that to her in some way, that she remembers having experienced that abuse as well. Because sometimes if the golden child hasn't really experienced that, they might just, rave about how wonderful childhood was and, how much they love their parents and everything, and just be in like total denial of what happened, and it could be that your mom also got your sister to like sympathize with her abuse against you. That will very often happen. She never experienced any abuse, maybe 1%. Okay. So in this case, she's going to be a lot less aware than you are of what the reality is, and probably much more willing to defend your mom, because if she always got everything from your mom, she always got love or attention, or at least what looked like that, and you had all the wrath of it, then maybe she just chose not to look or pay attention. And maybe she then identified with your mom's abuse against you and wrote the script like, well, my sister is just problematic. My sister is just, this and that. And she deserved, what happened, that sort of thing. That could be what's happening. It could be that she just doesn't want to stand up against your mom. If you are getting that feeling like, I shouldn't trust her anymore, like if that's what your intuition is saying, then you got to listen to that, right? Because your situation more than anyone else. I can only give you ideas based on, my past and like many other stories of people that I've heard. If you're getting the intuitive feeling that you shouldn't trust your sister, then don't tell her any more information. Go ahead and mirror that distance, don't reach out to her. Don't try to get involved with her, and just see where the cards are falling, see how things are going, see what she's doing. I would be really cautious if your sister's like calling you to like see how you're doing and that sort of thing, because that could be just like the person earlier who mentioned that, and that could be a trick. It's the dig disguised as concern, or the gossiping disguised as concern, where they're just calling you to check up on you, but actually they're extracting information. They want to know how you're doing. They want to somehow manipulate that, maybe, drop a few things that are going to make you feel doubtful or like crap about yourself, or maybe even like outright cruelty. or maybe it's just really, really covert, you know? So I would be very, very cautious about how you're proceeding with your sister now. Like setting new boundaries with both your mom and your sister is going to be really important for you moving forward. You know, if your sister figures it out and starts to come around and starts to reach out to you and be like, you're trying to talk to me about that. Like, I finally get it now, you know, then maybe you're in a place where you guys can talk about it. But if she's not there, like, it's like trying to engage in the smear campaign with the flying monkeys. Like it's better just to tap out of that, because trying to convince somebody of the truth who doesn't want to see the truth is exasperating, and it will lead you to the point of where you feel like you're losing your sanity. Yes, she gets everything and blames me for most of our family problems. Okay, so your sister's on board with your mom, and your sister is probably sympathizing with your mom. She's taking, how your mom has subscribed to you that role of scapegoat, and so she's sympathizing with that abuse, blaming you for the family problems. You're not really going to be able to get through to her. Since you're the golden child, how did you get to be this way? What got you started in your awareness? Oh, yes, I see her calls that way. Okay, the phone calls. All right, so let me go back to the golden child thing, but start with that. So the phone calls, now that's a trick. That's her, disguising something else as concern. So from now on, I would just not take the phone calls, and I'm not saying necessarily this is like forever, no contact, right? But just see how things go for a period of time. See how she gets to the point, because right now she's your mom's flying monkey. Quite likely. That's probably what's happening. And if you give her any information, she's going to use that against you, either directly with you or then feed it to your mom. And then it's going to come back to you. So how did you get to be this way? How did you realize it? How did you start in your awareness? So how did I even hear the word narcissist was through my last covert ex, right? And so I met this older woman, and she was, a recovering alcoholic. So she had been in the know of terminology and whatnot. And I think she even studied psychology. She was like my mom's age, essentially. And we would walk dogs, and she would start to probe in my life a little. And then she asked about my relationship, and I mentioned, a few things. She was like, "Oh, he's a narcissist." And I was like, "What do you mean? No, everything's fine. No." And I didn't want to hear it. And she just really kept pushing it. And so I was like, oh, but I didn't really want to hear it. And then one of my cousins, who figured out that her mom was one of these cluster B types, started telling me that she figured out what her mom was, and this is it, and that she had been in therapy, and that she had been going no contact because this is what the therapist recommended, and she read this book and that book. And as we were talking, I was like, oh my God, I think my mom was one of those. So I called my brother up, and I was like, hey, I just talked to our cousin, and she mentioned this and that, and I think mom might be a narcissist. And he was like, oh, did you just figure that out? I've known that for years. I was like, how did you know that? Because when he was in high school, it was so bad. Like, I had left for college, but it was so bad by the time he was in high school that like the whole town knew that my mom was crazy. And his girlfriend at the time, was very close to him. And then her mom was involved because she was seeing how distraught my brother was. And it was her mom, I think, who eventually brought it up to my brother. I don't know if she used the word narcissist, but somehow they figured out, and this was like before the internet was like really big, it was like the late 90s. And so like somehow the mom led him on to understand that, my mom had a mental health problem. Even though he didn't really get it, he finally recognized that she had a mental health problem. The problem was her, not him, because he was scapegoated not only by my mom, but by my dad's dad, who was a sociopath, I believe, very much scapegoated by him. And so, he had it from both of these family members. And, at some level, he probably really believed that he was the problem, so thankfully this other woman brought it up to him. And then when I called him, I had the validation of like, yeah, he was already in the know of that. But I was still, even though I had consciously realized it, it still took me a while, like more than a year, like a year and a half after that, before I really processed it. Like I was still just trying to get through the relationships and all the relationships, right, that had happened. And then I finally got it when I came back from Peru and went to my mom's house. And then, I tried to tell her about, how it was going to change my life and what I was going to do next. And she just like smacked it down, like just destroyed my hopes and faith. And that was when I saw her. Like that was when I broke through. I saw her right there, you know, like it was just like excruciating for her to like listen to me talk about my hopes and dreams. It's never going to work. And, you know, why would you even think it's going to work now? It never worked before. You should just give up and just go do this instead. And that's like, it came to that for me to see it. So for your sister, you know, I'm sorry, but probably the only way it's really going to get through to her is if something groundbreaking happens. Now, here's the trick. If you step out of the game, right, at least for a period of time, you go no contact, you set new boundaries, you start getting yourself right. Well, what's going to happen is your mom is going to have to find a new scapegoat. Like if you're out of the picture and she can't get that out of you, your sister is probably going to start to see some things, probably going to start to receive some things. Like your mom might transfer that to some friends or relatives and whatnot, but quite likely your sister is going to get involved there. And maybe, just maybe, it gets to the point one day where something happens and your sister breaks through and she has that moment like, oh my God, and really finally sees your mom, you know, but only because it's personally directed to her. Like, because if it's just directed to you and she never experienced it, like I said, in my family, it went back and forth. Like if mostly I complied, so mostly I was the golden child, but then sometimes I would rebel. And when I did rebel, then she would triangulate, you know, and go to my brother. Or even the last time that I saw her, you know, I went in there knowing I was going to confront her and talk about these things. And at some level she knew that. But she had just visited my brother. And the first thing she said to me was, oh, we just saw your brother and he's doing great. And he gave us the royal treatment, you know, and it was like, I could smell the triangulation where she was trying to flip things around. So maybe it happens with your sister where something, you know, now that you're out of the picture, your mom's going to have to find someone else for that role. Maybe your sister starts taking some of it on. Maybe she starts figuring it out. Maybe she never figures it out. Maybe your sister becomes, you know, just a blind codependent and continually attracts toxic people. Maybe your sister becomes the narcissist. You know, maybe your sister becomes your mom. Can't tell you for sure what's going to happen, but you know, the most important thing for you is to manage those boundaries so that you're healthy, so that you're safe, so that you're sane, and so that you don't keep playing the game. Right. And so, you know, if you want to go no contact, you know, that could be a really good way to just get right with yourself and figure out what you need to do to heal and figure things out. Maybe down the road, you feel like you can have some minimal contact with very clear boundaries and that sort of thing. You know, I don't know how close you live to her either. It really depends, you know, but you'll get to see how things go with these new boundaries. But for, you know, for at least for now with your sister too, I would not take those calls. You know, if you talk to her about anything at all, you know, the weather, your pet, you know, the sports games, but nothing real, like nothing. I mean, your pet's real. I didn't mean that, but you know what I mean? Like something surface and something that doesn't like really hit like your deep core, like your emotional anything, you know, nothing that you're really involved in, nothing that you really care about. Don't ever ask her for advice or anything again, because then that puts you in a very vulnerable spot. And it's probably better, you know, to also distance yourself from any other family members who are in close with them, because they can also be the flying monkeys. Okay, she followed up. Yeah, I'm 37 and just realizing I'm not the problem. My mom is so compassionate toward my sis. Yeah, 37. Yeah, I'm 38. You know, I just figured this out like 9, 10 months ago. My cousin, when she came to visit, she was in her 30s, you know, and she figured it out. And hey, better now than never, right? Because if you can finally make sense of your childhood and all of that, you know, like who cares that it took this long? At least now you get it. Now you see it. Now you can rewrite that in your mind. Like, okay, you know, I'm not this person. Like, I don't have to keep playing this role in life. Like, other people see value in me. Other people love me. I am lovable. That might be a huge thing for you to work on. I am lovable. You know, doing the inner child healing on that, because your inner child, as having been the scapegoat, probably believes that you didn't deserve love, but that wasn't about you. That was about a mother who couldn't give you that love. And yeah, your mom is acting real compassionate toward your sister. That will only last as long as your sister complies, though. Keep that in mind. Oh yeah, that's what I was thinking. My sister is turning quite narcissistic now for the last couple of years. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. And if that's the direction she's going, there's probably nothing you can do about that. And if that's the case, probably best just to not have contact with her, but she'll figure it out if she wants to, or maybe she'll just become your mom, and that'll just be the way that she deals with things. And then that'll just be how she carries on that legacy of abuse. But no matter what they do, the amazing thing is none of that has to affect you. As long as you have the proper boundaries in place to keep yourself sane, healthy, and well, then you don't have to care what they do. You don't have to subscribe to their belief systems. You don't have to play their game. You don't have to care if they abuse each other or celebrate each other's narcdom, like whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And none of that has to affect you anymore. And I know it's really hard when it's still fresh and the family dynamic is like still part of like your identity, right? And so now maybe it's time for you to break free from that identity, maybe get a therapist who really understands these dynamics of family, narcissistic abuse and whatnot, understands what it means for you to have been the scapegoat and how to help you work on the issues, to overcome that abuse, to overcome just the idea of yourself that has been created, to get past the self-sabotage that you probably do now because you're used to your mom sabotaging you all the time growing up, or maybe even your sister participating in that. Let me catch up here. There was some more. Someone says, trying to be positive and fix myself and perhaps impress a new employer that I'm working to move forward. I applied at a college intense program in software development, but I have to cancel that because it's too much in this unstable situation. I have to wait, I think. The application is in and the counselor calling me tomorrow. What do you think I should do? What if I end up homeless in the middle of the semester? Okay, so you have the phone call tomorrow. So spend tonight doing a little bit of soul searching. Get out of the house because you're the one who lives in that house. Get out of the house and away from that. Take a walk, especially to clear your mind. And, ask yourself, like, is this the next step right now? Or is this the step that you want to take in the future? Like, do you have the mental capacity right now to focus on this, what you call intense program, right? Do you have the mental focus for this right now? Do you have the energy for this right now? Can you afford the time and the money right now? Will this help you in the way that it will give you something outside of the house and something new that you're learning and something that's bringing you joy and something that's working to your future? Could it be that? Or is it just not the right time for you yet? And that's up to you. And that depends where you're at internally. So I would suggest that you really tune into that internal barometer of yours, and really imagine, like, how do you imagine doing this? Like, do you imagine going through this semester knowing that maybe the end of this relationship is coming, maybe the separation is coming in the middle of the semester? Are you going to be able to focus and get through and, be successful in the way that you want to when the situation is going on? Or do you feel like you actually need that to get yourself out of this situation, to get yourself out of that mental perspective, to get yourself physically out of that situation? Do you need that new thing in your life to give you something, some purpose to work for, some purpose that's pulling you forward, magnetizing you away from the past? It could go either way. So it depends on you and where you're at and what you think that you can handle right now. So really do some soul searching and see. Maybe you don't know in 24 hours. Maybe you need to tell the counselor tomorrow, okay, I need a little more time to think about this. Maybe you give them a new deadline, or they give you a new deadline of when to talk, right? And you can feel it out. Or maybe you think about it and feel it out and sleep on it. And maybe tomorrow when you wake up, you're really clear about your decision. But I think there's some positives and negatives to that. And I think it just depends where you're at, where you feel you're at, and what you dream. And so maybe, like, when I'm at a split roads decision, I read the I Ching. I always read the I Ching. It's like an oracle, Chinese oracle book. It's like spot on every time. Like, every time. Even the vocabulary that comes out of there directly describes the situation. But if I don't read the I Ching, or if I didn't know about the I Ching, and sometimes in addition to that, maybe I don't want to listen to the advice right away, and I said, like, really? So I would imagine the two different directions. What is my life like if I enroll in this program? What is my life like if I put off this program for now? And imagine that. And imagine each of those roads and where you're going. And then really check in, which feels better. When you imagine that, which feels better to you? Go with that one. Someone says here, my ex-narc was jealous of my friends, my job, the money I worked hard for, other men that paid me attention, though I never tried to make him feel insecure about anything. He had 2 of his ex-girlfriends contact me and showed many other women my messages. He triangulated me a lot, but I didn't know anything about narcs until recently, until I put all the pieces together. He lied to me about so many things. My intuition tells me he may betray me and get revenge after no contact because he may think I found another man. He made me paranoid, so maybe that's my paranoia talking. I've been no contact for only 2 weeks, but I'm hoping he'll just quietly move on with his life and leave me alone. Do narcs seek revenge or usually move on quickly to another target? So usually they're immediately getting supply with someone else, like immediately upon your disconnection, and or sometimes before. Like if they're planning to discard you, they will already have someone waiting, or multiple people. If they get the sense that you might leave, maybe you're already having preliminary discussions, they will already be cultivating other people. Sometimes they're already cultivating other people when you're in, the devaluation stage, like long before they're actually planning on leaving, or long before they ever suspect that you'll leave. So usually there's definitely people in waiting. Sometimes that doesn't come through all the way, or sometimes they're just not getting everything they need. And so then they'll try to come back to get supply from you. Sometimes it's just for the thrill of it. They just want to know that they're wanted. They want to know that you want them. You know what I mean? And so they'll play that dirty trick. Like maybe they'll text you or something, and like maybe you even think like they're trying to get you back, but they're not. Like they're just trying to see if you still want them, or they want to know how much you're suffering when you're not with them. When do they seek revenge? Usually when you take it upon yourself to get revenge on them. Like often what's more important to the narcissist is their public perception, like how people see them and their image. And so usually they're not going to risk that and do something that could make them vulnerable by seeking revenge, or like in any way giving you anything to prove against them. You know what I mean? Like that's usually one of the most important things to them. So usually they don't take it to that level. Sometimes they do when they're the hermit type. There's a specific kind of borderline that's a hermit. There's like a specific kind of covert narcissist that's a hermit, right? And so if they're like the hermit type, they probably don't have as much of that public perception thing going on. That was my ex, who was doing the really disturbing gaslighting things after I left him. So yeah, he was trying to get revenge on me. He was still trying to make me think I was crazy even after he left. Why? I don't know. Maybe just because he was the hermit. Like there was no one else in his life. He had nothing else to do but try to get revenge. So it really depends on your person. I wouldn't give him any fuel for that though. Like back in the day when that was happening, I'm sure, I remember even the day he left, I posted something passive aggressive like, oh, thank God it's Independence Day, or something. And so, I'm sure he saw that or got wind of that somehow. So if you do things like that, you will provoke them. It's just best not to do any of that. No passive aggressive social media posting, no like telling them how much they hurt you, or, how they deserve to get their karma back. Like it's usually better not to do that, because that they could drive them to the point of wanting to seek revenge, So I'm really sorry. 2 weeks is still pretty fresh. It's still really raw right now. And I agree with you. I would also just hope that he would just move on. It really will be easier than if he's trying to hoover. If he tries to hoover, no response in any way to what he sends. And it's better just to have him blocked in every single way that he could try to get in. Don't answer any unknown calls, any blocked calls. And yeah, so you mentioned these red flags that you see, now you realize like he was jealous of your friends, your job, your money, your success in any way. Right. And so, it's like you said, it's not like you tried to make him feel insecure. This was just your life. You had friends, you had family, you had a good job, you made money, this was your life. And he was just jealous of that because he was insecure of his own self and, his own life. And so, that's why he did those things to you. And so now, moving forward, those are red flags. So if you ever see or sense, because remember, you don't always get direct proof of it. It comes down to that feeling, that barometer, like this feels uncomfortable. I feel like this person is jealous, this kind of thing. And so if you get that feeling again, that's probably a sign that something's going on, did you mention in here something about like, he made you paranoid. And so you feel like, maybe it's your paranoia talking. And so it's maybe more than just a paranoia, but it's more like they always, like when you're leaving, I think I mentioned this in the earlier session today, when you leave them and like you want to tell people about it or like you want to speak the truth, it's like there's this built-in programming that tells you if you tell the truth, you're going to be in trouble, right? Or, if you do anything, if you move forward, like you're going to be in trouble, that sort of thing. So I think it's just the built-in programming that's making you feel that way, and realize you have the right to speak your truth, but I would do it in a safe way with safe people and support network and not like passively aggressively on social media and whatnot, like hoping that he'll see it, because then that could trigger him to want to seek revenge. So I would go quietly too, and hopefully he just goes quietly and moves on. Oh, you're welcome to that person from earlier with the family situation. Okay, person with the college course. It's online and I would be right here next to the sun. So no, I think I just need to work on job and getting out first. That sounds safe. That sounds really safe. And then when you get out and, you get to your own place and everything, then you'll have a lot of energy to focus on that. You'll have your own space. You'll be able to focus on work. There'll be no one trying to sabotage you. So yeah, trust your intuition. Someone says, I'm 37 and just started to realize how much trying to prove that I'm lovable is at the core of so many of my issues I've struggled with my whole life. I'm glad that I'm not alone at this stage of realization and wondering how long it takes to really believe we are lovable. Took you, and what are some things I can do to help believe in this truth? Okay. How long does it really take to believe we are lovable? And what are some things I can do to believe this truth? Okay, how long does it take? I don't know that there's an exact time, right? I think it's more like the amount of energy that you invest in the actions that you take make a big difference. So self-love, right? Like the start of self-love is self-honesty. It's like getting real with yourself, like getting really honest, looking at the things about yourself that you don't want to see, owning 50% of the responsibility, of a relationship, like your part in there. You were not responsible for the abuse. If that was not your fault, you do not have to own any of that, but you enabled it, right? Like you bought the rationalization, you bought the excuse, you kept coming back for more, right? I'm not saying that to blame you. I'm saying that to be real and to be honest with you, because when you recognize that, you recognize you have power. You recognize that you weren't powerless in that situation. You thought you were, but actually now you realize you have a lot of power, and your power is to not engage in that game and to not get involved in another game. And when you can recognize that, then you have power moving forward. Then the next time you see that game again, oh, this is that game again. This person's going to try to trick me into thinking I'm not lovable. Not playing that game this time, because it's really clear to you, you're empowered, that you have a part in that. You can either step in or step out, right? Because that's all you can do in that game. Like, are you going to enable it, allow it to continue, encourage it to keep happening, or are you going to step out and say, no, that's not for me? And so getting real and getting honest with yourself, that's stage one of self-love. Like stage one, it gives you something to work on. And the more ways that you're not loving yourself, right? And there were probably things that were trained from childhood, possibly you were raised by a narcissistic parent. If this is something that you feel like it's been at the core, your whole life, in some way, one or both of your parents did not give you that love. Like, you didn't get the template for that growing up. And so now you got to create that for yourself. You got to first recognize that the dynamic in childhood was unhealthy, whether it was narcissistic or abusive or not, one way or the other, that was not healthy. How was it not healthy? What did you learn from that? Observing mom, observing dad, observing their relationship, observing how they treated you. What was not healthy about that? And get real about that. And then recognize that, you were just a child and you deserved love. And doing like an inner child meditation exercise, like a visualization exercise where maybe you use the binaural beats and you use the theta frequency to access your subconscious, and maybe you see your inner child there in front of you. And I did this kind of spontaneously in an MDMA experience, and suddenly my inner child appeared. And I didn't know if it was going to be my daughter or who was, and I realized it was me. And she was just sitting on the floor, and we had this moment. And it was like I was able to see her and tell her that everything was going to be okay and that she is lovable. And we're like bookends here. Here you are at the beginning and here I am now. I'm out of it. But what's going to happen in between here, it's going to be pretty bad. And, there's going to be times where you doubt yourself and doubt your worth and doubt, how you deserve love and doubt your reality and all of that, but it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this together, and I love you, and you're so worthy of love, and whatever is coming from you, like that was just the way I handled it, right? But whatever is coming from you, to talk to this inner child, this little girl, I think you're a girl, to talk to this inner child, this inner girl of yours, and to love her and to listen to, because maybe as you're doing this visualization, maybe you get this feeling like she's talking to you in some way. It's a part of you, really. It's like a part of your soul, and it wants to communicate. Maybe even ask this little inner child, is there something you want to tell me? Is there something you want to show me? And maybe you get some sense of that, or you see a symbol of something and it means something to you, and you write it down and journal that, because maybe it's not super clear at the beginning, but it is down the road. And so I would really do this inner child exercise where, you have some sort of dialogue, and then you let the inner child know that everything is going to be okay, that they are loved, that you love them, that you are going to get through this together, and everything is going to be okay. See, look where I am now. And that's what you're going to tell them. See, look where I am now. I survived. We survived. Everything is going to be okay. And it's like, really, it's like that part of you, like, it doesn't need to like scream out in a tantrum anymore. Maybe you even notice the relief after that, like that part of you that will go to that child state when things would get bad, or when the trigger happened. Like if some random person treated you with disrespect and you're like, man, I didn't get any love there. And then like the inner child in you is like going to throw a tantrum or something that, maybe you recognize like suddenly that stops happening, because now you're being there for your inner child, and you're working through these issues. So, the self-love, start with the self-honesty, and then, being that this is like a core life issue that's been with you all your life, really get real about what happened in childhood, and then have that dialogue and that healing connection with your inner child, and then welcome that child back into your heart, and just feel that integration of that part of you back totally fully in you, instead of like the soul fragmentation, which is often what happens, during trauma and abuse. Is like part of your soul just like pops out because it's like, it's too much to deal with. So there's like, this dissociation of parts of you. And so reintegrating these parts after they've been loved, and re-welcomed back into you. Someone asks, it is feel good that I am normal person from 17-year legally married and 22 years altogether. Blame myself that I was not good enough to keep this marriage together. I left my house for safety because the narcissistic husband is law enforcement and want to make a case for put in jail, all because I found him with another woman and his perfect image was destroyed. 1 month with no contact, but I'm getting divorced. Do you think I should present my lawyer in the negotiation, or keeping private in a different room. Okay. So I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to. Are you saying that during the divorce proceedings, is that what this is, where you have a choice of either being in the room with your lawyer and your ex, or if you have the option of being in a different room while this is happening? If you have that option, maybe I would take that option, because, when you're in front of them, it's really, really stressful. Like, your nervous system is going to react as if that were like a lion, like literally the same reaction is happening. And he's law enforcement. God, I'm really sorry. Those are really tricky, and yeah. So, okay. So you said you're making a case to try to get him in jail. Or is he trying to put you in jail? I'm kind of confused. I'm not really sure. Can you clarify that for me? Is this about the divorce proceedings, or is he trying to put you in jail, or are you trying to get him arrested for what's happening? Can you please just clarify that? I'm going to read the next question and then I'll come back to it. Okay. Somebody says, after learning about narcs, which I knew nothing about, I'm just now realizing that my boss is a narc. She's a tyrant at work who enjoys intimidating people. We had a big argument a few months ago when I brought an issue to her attention, which nobody does, but I didn't know she was a narc at the time. Maybe I should have been quiet, but my coworkers told me she may respect me now, that I didn't back down and gave her a piece of my mind. She gave me good performance reviews, but I think it was to keep me quiet. Do you have any advice on how to get along at work with her until I can find another job, which may be another year? Also, my mom was a narc and passed away a few years ago. I'm just now realizing from all my research how much damage she did to me. She told me she wished I was never born, and I was the biggest mistake she ever made, among other cruel things like the silent treatment. I can't now have a conversation with her for closure, but I realize how my inner child is still affected. I'm so sorry. That's just horrible, horrible, cruel things to say. And, it's so often the truth, like narcissists not wanting to be a parent, and then they have the kid anyways. And then either they directly tell the kid that cruel thing, or they just make the child believe like they were unwanted their whole life, which they were, because they having to like spend any energy or attention on something that's not them, or not meeting their own needs, or, like a mother has to set aside or sacrifice some of her own needs to take care of the needs of the child sometimes. And with the narcissist, like, they're often not even capable of that, and very negligent parents, or they do things, out of like an obligation of like meeting the minimal requirements, but then resent the child their whole life, for that sort of thing. But so regarding your work situation, yeah, it's possible that because you stood up, she now respects you a little more, and she'll have to then, go and abuse other people at work. And maybe she gave you the good performance, reviews to keep you quiet and to not, let you after her. That's a possibility. I think it's a great idea that you're looking for another job, and then you mentioned it might not happen immediately. And that's often what happens, right? So it's good that you're looking for the next step, because that's not going to be a long-term situation to stay there. It's not going to be good long-term. So keep looking for another job. In the meanwhile, dealing with her, is having the boundaries, having really clear boundaries, not having any personal relationship with her, not sharing anything personal from your life, not making yourself vulnerable in any way, shape, or form personally with her. Minding all of the details, like do not let anything slip. Double check your work. You know what I mean? Like, make sure there's absolutely nothing that she can reproach you for, because that's what they'll often do. Is when they can't run you out immediately, they'll often look for little things like, did you show up late a few times? Did you not send that email? Did you send it to the wrong, whatever, right? And then they can use that against you. So make sure you're just really taking care of things, that you're doing like 110%. It's all really clear. You didn't make any mistakes. There's nothing that you can get blamed for, covering your tracks in that way. And just being solid with your boundaries. Like, don't let her win. You know, like when she tries to dominate you, it sounds like you've already stood up. So it sounds like you've already started to set these boundaries and you're already starting to understand this dynamic. And it sounds like she's kind of backed down a little, which is good. It probably means that she's targeting somebody else now because they're looking for an easy target. So if you're not the easy bend over backwards person, she's going to find the bend over backwards person. You know, in an office of 20 people, there's got to be someone there who's easier than you, you know, and that's unfortunate that it's probably going to happen to someone else, but that's not your responsibility. You got to take care of you. This is a survival situation and you got to get out of this so that you can move forward, you know, with your life. I would keep, it sounds like you're doing a good job with these boundaries. It sounds like you understand, you know, who this person is that you're dealing with. I would keep working on those boundaries. Don't be afraid to stand up and say no, that you're not going to do that. You know, when she tries to like dominate you or get you to do something that's outside of the responsibilities of your job, and, you know, just make it really clear and then do your work the best that you can do so that you give her no ammunition, nothing. And then, you know, the boundaries also of sharing, like not getting involved personally. Don't share anything personal with your life. If, you know, everybody's going to go to like her house for a party or something, you find something else to do, that sort of thing. Just don't create any more social involvements than you already have with her. And it sounds like you're doing a good job. So I would keep moving in that direction, looking for another job and keep holding those boundaries, you know, not letting her take advantage. Someone writes here, I have all this rage pent up and want to call my ex and all of her stuff and send one last text. Would that give us closure if we did not expect a response back? Not really. Like the closure is going to happen from inside you. If you send the text or any form of communication, you know, it's going to eat at you some way. Like some part of you probably really wants to see some kind of response. And then if it doesn't come, you're going to be like, oh, why did I do that? Why did I put it out there? If you send it and then you get back a response and then, you know, they attack you and then you feel like crap about yourself. Like the thing is that the closure never happens with the narcissist. The closure happens inside you. It's like your own internal understanding of what happened, your acceptance of what happened and what that person was. And like, if you want to write the letter, write it to yourself. And like, I'm saying this because I made that mistake several times. And if I could do that again, I wouldn't do it again. I would have just cut it off. I might have typed, you know, the message to myself and read it and just felt good. And I might have even burnt it or something, you know, like that. Maybe even read it in front of the mirror as if I were reading it to that person, or just spoke to them in the mirror as if I, you know, were going to tell them those words, but didn't actually reach out. I just wouldn't take that step because it leaves you open. It leaves you open to either a response or a no response. And either way, in some level, that's going to bother you, you know, that they responded or didn't respond. So I would really recommend doing the closure inside. You know, I've also like held on to stuff for too long afterwards, you know, just didn't realize like all that stuff is like paraphernalia. Like I would just get rid of the stuff so it's not in your house. Because, you know, if you set up something where then they can come get their stuff, then you're back in contact again and you leave yourself open again. And it's just not healthy. Like it never goes to a good place. I wouldn't give her, you know, that satisfaction. I would deal with the rage instead. You know, you talked about feeling the rage pent up. That's because of the abuse. You know, rage is the repressed anger, not being able to express the anger. The anger was righteous anger. You were abused, you were hurt. It is normal and natural that you felt angry about that. There's nothing wrong with feeling angry about that. So, you know, I would spend some time, you know, alone with yourself where you can do this work in private and get angry. You know, maybe you want to do it in the mirror, or maybe you just want to visualize the person sitting or standing in front of you. And I would get really, you know, allow yourself to feel all that anger. Say all the things you wish you said, you know, like, you bitch, how could you, you know, whatever. Just get it out. Get it out. Say the things that you wish you could say. Express the anger. The anger has to move. It only becomes toxic when it gets stuck in there. And that's when it becomes rage, when it gets repressed. And then something random triggers it, or some other thing that makes you angry, and then all this anger comes out, and then that becomes really unhealthy because it's not even like directed toward the person who initially caused the abuse and the hurt. And you don't want to do that towards them either, because then that just gets you back in the loop. But to work out the anger is, you know, either working it out in front of the mirror or envisioning this person, or close your eyes if you want to meditate and visualize this person and saying all the things that you would say, and do that. So you really get into that anger and like allow yourself to get angry. And if you can find the privacy, like, you know, if you have a car and you can, like, not while you're driving, right? But if you can park in some parking lot where like no one else is around, you put all your windows up and just like roar and get angry and scream and let it out. Like one of my teachers in Peru used to take us to the middle of the mountains and he would tell us to get angry. You know, he'd be like, scream, I want to hear the anger. And we would be like, ah, it just feels weird, right? To get it. He's like, no, it's not good enough. Like louder, more angry. I want to hear it. And wow, was it liberating. And what would happen is like, people would get into it and we would all be screaming and just like letting out all this stuff. And then you look around and like, then there were people sobbing and people on the ground, someone in fetal position, someone just like laughing hysterically. It's like, because once the anger goes, then the deeper emotions come up, because the anger is protecting the deeper, more vulnerable emotions like loss and hurt and despair and all of this kind of stuff. And so it's like, you have to work through the anger to process that, to get to the deeper level. And you don't want to keep the anger stuck inside. Like, again, validate yourself that it was okay to feel that anger. It was a normal and natural response to abuse. And at this point, you want to take the responsibility of processing that so you can move past it, so that anger doesn't eat you alive, because it will eat your body, it will eat your mind, and it will just affect your life in general. It will be projecting this vibe out, and it'll attract more situations for you to get angry. And the reason is just like the universe doesn't hate you, is because the universe is responding with the same vibration. And so like, you know, it'll send you another person or situation to make you really angry, to make you face the anger. You know, but then if you just keep burying it, it's going to be more and more, right? So you got to process that anger, let it out in a safe way, you know, acknowledge the fact that it was real and it was there for a reason, and it's okay to feel that way. And now you want to move through that so you can be healthy, you know, so that you don't have to get sick from that anger, so you don't have to pass that anger on to someone else, so that you can start cultivating positive vibrations of like joy and love in your life. And then that way, you know, everything in your life starts to change. So getting angry is an important part of the grieving and healing process. And then, you know, you'll probably see what else comes up behind it. So that would be my answer to your question, to handle that in a healthy way and to not get yourself hooked back into that. Because any contact that you send out, even if you tell yourself, I'm not going to listen to the response, you're going to kind of be like, you know what I mean? Like you part of you is really going to want to know what the response is. And that's just a dangerous hook, because it can go from zero to blackout in no time. You know, like the drunk who says, you know, they're just going to go out and have a drink instead of abstaining, right? Which is like no contact, is like the abstinence. And they're like, well, I'm just going to go have one drink. I'm just going to send this one message and it'll be okay. And that'll be it, just one drink. And then they don't know what happened between like zero and blackout. Like they have no idea what happened. They went for one drink. And that's what happens is like when you go for one text or one glimpse of the Facebook page or something, it can go from zero to blackout in no time. It's like zero to Stockholm syndrome in no time. So you really want to put up the boundaries to not allow that to happen and to deal with that anger in a healthy way, and the closure too. Okay. Someone asked privately, what's the best way to trust someone again after having a relationship with a borderline narcissist? 1.5 years later, I've had sort of a disinterest in dating again, even though my first relationship was with my borderline ex. It feels like all the similar things we both liked was almost too good to be true. And I feel like the people I've met since and had some interest in dating, as well as interest in dating me, are boring. Like they don't come close to how much I was attracted to my ex. How do I eliminate the standards set and created in the relationship I had with my ex? Okay, great question. So yeah, at the beginning, when your ex was like pretending to be interested in everything you were interested in and interested in everything that you were saying and all that stuff, it was all fake. Like none of that was real. And that was just all a ploy, because, you know, if you meet somebody and it's like you share a similar interest, you have something in common. And so what happens when you have something in common with someone is you immediately extend trust to them. Like if you're not thinking about it, oh, we have this in common, well, we should trust one another. And it's like, it just happens, right? And so it opens you to that. And so, you know, yeah, it was too good to be true. It wasn't real. She was faking that stuff. She's probably not doing any of that stuff now. She's probably telling the next person that she's totally in, you know, to whatever he or she is into. So, feeling like the people that you've met since, are boring. This is often what people will say, for you, I think you said it was just one relationship, your first relationship. For some people, it's also been like relationship after relationship after relationship with these same types, and then they're looking for that drama. They're looking for the thrill. They're looking for something that's going to stimulate the brain drugs and the brain high. Maybe they're only looking for the positive stuff, which is all the infatuation and the idealization at the beginning, but either way, it's looking for a toxic pattern, because in healthy relationships, that doesn't happen. And so healthy relationships looks more boring compared to this wild emotional roller coaster ride that you were on before. So it will look like that at first, but the reality is that you want to find like a baseline, get back to your baseline of like, what feels good in an interaction with another person? Like, what is a healthy sense of chemistry? What does that feel like when it's not like this, like ramped up at the beginning? Like when you notice that, if you ever start dating someone again, it's like ramped up, or there's this like crazy intense passion chemistry, probably not healthy, probably another toxic situation. So, look at it very closely and recognize that it's going to take your brain some time. Did you say it's been a year? 1.5 years later. So yeah, your brain really has had some time to come back. But if you've still had any sort of contact during that time, like looking at photos or seeing this person or any of these like tricky ways that are thinking that you're no contact, but not really no contact, that's still kept it fresh. Or even if you just have allowed yourself to think about her a lot, like obsess and ruminate about her a lot, she's still very much alive inside of you. And when you think about her, it's still happening inside your body, And so when you compare this wild emotional roller coaster ride to someone who's just more steady, it might look like this person is more boring at first, but in reality, that's the healthier person. This is not healthy, the drastic ups and downs, so that will calm down in time. And it's possible that there was still something you were doing that was still keeping that alive inside of you. If you get real honest with yourself, you might be able to notice how there was a certain habit you had over the last 1.5 years that was still keeping that alive, or maybe you were still running into her even on accident, and that was still like keeping things alive, and then everything else looked boring after that. But it's important to recognize that it only looks boring in comparison to the relativity of that, and then get real with yourself. Like, do you really want this? Probably not. So how do you eliminate the standards? Is getting honest with yourself, getting really honest about what that was and how that wasn't real, and how that was fabricated intensity, fabricated emotions to get you hooked, to create the addiction that you eventually had. It was all set up that way. And, she knew she could keep you there by doing that, up and down. And like when things were really down and you were considering leaving or breaking it off, then she probably brought it right back up. And it would keep doing this, and that's just how it goes. So get real with yourself and recognize you don't want that. You don't want that in your life. That's unhealthy. It destroys you. It makes you feel like you're losing your sanity. It makes you feel like you're losing your clarity. You start to get really confused. Your self-worth goes down. Your self-respect goes down. Like, get really honest with yourself about what that leads to. And eventually it's not going to feel so boring when you meet other people, because you're eventually going to come down from that high and you're going to reach your baseline and where you feel comfortable. And Jackson McKenzie, the author of Psychopath Free, talks about your constant. I don't know if you've heard this term before, but your constant is like a person, or maybe it's your dog, in your life. And this is like maybe your best friend or someone that you're really, really close to, who's a really healthy person. And when you hang out with that person or you talk to that person on the phone, you generally always feel the same. You feel great when you talk to each other. You feel great after an interaction. You behave in, pretty much the same kind of way when you're with this person, when you're alone and when you're with this person. And you generally always have the same emotional state when you're hanging out with that person and then afterward. Whereas if you compare that how you were and how you reacted to your ex, right? Where you were all over the place, you know, and you were like being a person that you weren't really, and you were responding in ways that really aren't you, and you were feeling about yourself in ways that were very foreign to you and aren't at all like how you are when you're with your constant. And that's how you check in. You know, is this new person healthy for me or not? What's the feeling I'm getting? Am I all over the board again? It's not healthy. You know, are things like pretty steady? Well, that sounds more healthy, you know, and then you can see like, are there any actual interests and values in common? It might be that you have really different, you know, activities. Maybe this new person that you meet is into riding bikes and you're not into riding bikes at all. Maybe they're really into drinking wine and you're more of a beer person. Like, these are little things, right? Not necessarily major things. Major values are like something that's like a big part of your life, you know, like something that's really important to you. Or even something like, you know, maybe for you, like maybe you're a foodie and like nutrition and food, it's like a big deal to you. Like, it's like a big part of your life. You like to cook, you like to share meals with people. And maybe even healthy food is important to you. And so you take time in procuring healthy ingredients and preparing this delicious and healthy meal. And the person that you meet is really into fast food. And food is just functional for them. They just eat for the calories. They don't really care. They're not really excited about certain tastes or certain foods. They definitely don't care about the health aspect. And they would just assume go out and grab some fast food than like, definitely more than like actually preparing something. And you cook for them and they're just like, meh, that's probably not going to be a really beneficial relationship for you, because this is something that's really important to you. You know, if that's something that's really important to you and that person's like not at all into it and you can't share that important thing with that person, then you probably want to look for someone who has more in common with you. You know, so look for the values first and foremost, like the core values, like know what your values are. And then you could recognize what the other person's values are, and you can see, are they similar? Do we have similar values of respect? Do we have similar values of love and connection and how we express these things to others? Do we have similar values of what the expectations of communication are, and trust and, you know, loyalty and these sorts of things? Like, that's what I would be looking more for. Someone says, my female ex was divorced at the age of 34 and being divorced for a while, said I was her second boyfriend, but now I realize that was a lie. What's to keep their past hidden? She was a serial dater as well. So are you asking like, why would she keep her past hidden? Something she didn't want you to know about? You know, maybe like maybe she was hiding the fact that the same exact thing happened in all those relationships of the past, and she didn't want you to know that these people figured it out and they eventually left her, you know, and that sort of thing. Maybe, you know, maybe she had something about being married, and maybe she has like some kind of religious value around that and something to do with that. You know, maybe, you know, you said she was a serial dater. Maybe she prefers that, you know, to having a committed relationship, just, you know, date people for a month or two and then move on to the next and that sort of thing. You know, probably hiding something, whatever they're not admitting to you, whether it's a lie by omission or a lie by flat out telling you something that's not true. Either way, they're lying and hiding something. You know, something they're ashamed of, something they didn't want you to know about them because you might figure out who they are, or they might appear less desirable to you. You know, it's something to do with the image that she was trying to get you to believe in, you know, that mask that she was wearing, the image that she was trying to create. So it was something about that. And whatever it was that she was hiding was not in agreement with that mask, that image, whatever that was not aligned with the image. And she didn't want to, you know, she didn't want you to see that. She didn't want you to look into that. So she kept that aside, you know. Sorry, I meant to say, what was the point to keep it hidden? Yes, our relationship lasted only 6 weeks and flipped on me on a dime. Yeah. So this sounds like, you may have been the one who mentioned like the borderline word even. That can often be a borderline tendency. Usually it's more the male borderlines that do that than the women, but the women can do it too. And, like as soon as you start to get in and close, they discard you, because and it usually happen like right after. And that's why people are so bewildered, because they're like, we just had this really great experience. We just had this really great date, or we just had this really great night, or this really great day. And then just like that, they were gone, or they just broke up with me just like that. That'll often happen because they don't want to commit to anyone. They just, want to do the serial dating thing. Maybe that person was married to someone who was much more serious on that cluster B spectrum. That can happen a lot of times with borderlines. Is they'll get involved with maybe a psychopath or like a really malignant narcissist or something, and it'll be kind of a switch dynamic, and then after that they're like, well, they're never getting married again or anything like that, and they're never going to get close to anyone ever, and they're just gonna, screw over men like the men screwed over them, or screw over women like the women screwed over them, that sort of thing, and never allow anybody else to get close again. It could be any of those things. But usually whatever they're hiding they don't want you to see that, because it's not going to support the image that they're trying to get you to believe in. Okay, someone says, I feel like narcs are everywhere. My ex, my boss, my mother, some of my friends, etc., are narcs. I had no idea until my research how many have been in my life and have hurt me. I feel wounded inside and sometimes don't have the strength to deal with people. How can I build up my armor or self-esteem to make it through the day sometimes, even at work? I feel like I'm a target for narcs. Okay, this is often the realization that a lot of us have, especially when we were raised by a narcissist, is like when we finally have that breakthrough realization that whatever relationship we're in, that person is something on that cluster B, spectrum. And then when you really start doing inventory and you're like, oh man, like the friends list, the bosses, the coworkers, the neighbors, like you name it. And in the past, the past starts making a lot of sense. It's like once you find that keyword, it's like your whole life makes sense, because usually this is a pattern that has followed you your whole life. Every now and then it happens that a person did not grow up in that. It wasn't at all their childhood, but they had some kind of major sense of loss, in their life. Someone died or they lost something major. And that was the point of vulnerability that like a psychopath got in or something. That can happen sometimes, but usually it's one of these cases where we realize like, oh my God, this has been my whole life. This pattern has followed me my whole life. I just never realized who these people were, and so, yeah, it does feel like they're everywhere. The reality is that there are millions and millions and millions of them. The statistics say between 1 in 7, which was Jackson, McKenzie, and Psychopath Free, or between 1 in 10, which is Out of the Fog website. And they'll both support that, but in reality, like we can't know for sure, because if you think about it, most of these people never ever admit they have a problem because they have a self-responsibility problem. And most of them never seek out treatment. So nothing ever official gets noted. So it's really just a guesstimate of how many of them are out there. But if the statistics are saying between 1 in 7 and 1 in 10, it's probably somewhere along those lines, right? And so, yeah, if you think about being in a room of 10 people, chances are at least one of them is. And chances are, if you've been surrounded by this, you've been swimming in narc-infested waters all your life, chances are the density is probably higher around you than it is around other people, right? So the more you work on yourself and the more you become aware of these patterns, the more you start to set healthy boundaries with the people in your life, you get those toxic people out, you deal with the discomfort of being a bit more alone for a period of time and not having as many friends, or acquaintances in your life, because you're getting rid of that stuff so that you can then welcome something healthy in your life. Going through this period, getting really clear about who you are, who are you as a person? What is your identity? How do you show up in the world? Is it that you want in life? Purpose? What are your values? Get really clear on all that stuff. And then working out your boundaries too. And you're going to start to meet healthier people. And I think that, there will always be those randoms that come across, the radar, just because they're out there, and because also it's sort of like the universe is like testing you. You make sure, you're still with it and you're still on your toes, or maybe you're trying to work something out from the past, and then like you go out to run errands, and sure enough, you meet some random person who triggers some feeling that reminds you of that thing that you're working on from the past. Maybe it just like triggers your anger, and it makes you angry because it gets you in touch with that anger, or it triggers, your difficulty in expressing your need, like somebody's like stepping on you in the grocery store line, and maybe you feel like, I should just be polite and move out of the way, right? Because you were just taught that way, programmed that way since childhood. And maybe that's the opportunity for you to stand up and say, hi, excuse me, you're stepping on my foot. Thank you. As they step away, like you start to set these boundaries, and you start to develop this sense of self that's no longer, deferring to that and yielding to that. And then things start to shift in your life. And I really do believe that it's like less and less of them, come up, but your armor, right, that you're talking about, or your self-esteem, the armor is predominantly the boundaries. As long as your boundaries are set, and they're set healthy, and they're protecting you and what you value and what's important to you, your self-esteem starts going up, because the self-esteem, I believe, is about your ability to interact with reality and the feedback that you're getting from reality. So if you feel helpless and powerless, and you get out there and you're interacting in reality, and the response, the feedback you're getting from people in the universe is like awful, your self-esteem is really low. Whereas if you start to feel empowered, and you start to set these boundaries, and you start to see the difference now in how people are, treating you with these boundaries. So you're watching the feedback of reality, or now you're just exuding this vibe of like, I'm not the person you want to just step on the toes, like you're not just going to cut me off in line, you're not even putting out that vibe anymore. So it's like your boundaries are your armor, you know what I mean? And then, as you're interacting with reality and you're getting more positive feedback, your self-esteem is going up. To make it through the day, sometimes even at work. So if you're dealing with this at the workplace and you need to set, new boundaries at work, probably going to need to look for another job if you're really surrounded by them. But in the meanwhile, while you're looking, use this as an opportunity, as a learning experience to practice your boundaries and to practice setting them at work in that kind of environment, with people that you aren't like intimately in a relationship with, but having to deal with every single day at work, practicing the gray rock technique. That will be really important, in your boundaries and your communication with people. And, it's normal to feel like you're a target for them because you were raised that way. Like you were probably raised under the programming that pre-qualifies you to be a target. I was, that's why I kept attracting it. That's why so many of us keep attracting it, or kept attracting it, because it literally is like you're wearing the target, like they sense it at some level. They sense your lack of surety in yourself. They sense their ability to manipulate your perception of yourself because you aren't clear in who you are. You know what I mean? Like those kinds of things. Or you don't feel the confidence to set your boundary, and you allow them to guilt trip you or to shame you or to make your need feel unimportant or unworthy or something. So they notice these things and they'll hone in on that. So you don't want to set off those signals. You want to set out the signals that like, I have boundaries, and you really don't want to get involved over here. You don't want to, test those boundaries. But if you do test those boundaries, I will enforce them, and be willing to follow through. Because if you set a boundary and the person tests it, which they almost always do, and they might do with some force, don't compromise it. Don't let them in. Don't go back on what you said. If you set a boundary, enforce it. That way they know you mean business. Because otherwise the message you're sending is, well, I'm going to tell you this is my boundary, and I'm going to say that I'm going to put this out here, but I really don't own this, and I really don't feel confident about this. So if you really bully me enough, okay, I'm just going to let you do that thing again, right? So you want to have these boundaries, and it's just like it wards them off, and not getting caught up in it. Like, maybe neighbors or something, right? Like somebody comes up to you and you suspect maybe this person might be a narcissist. You don't really know them maybe, but like they're trying to talk to you. And so just don't get caught in any discussions. Keep it moving. Keep your body moving. Keep your body language moving. keep your body turned away from them, like particularly your hips and your feet should be facing another direction, because that sends the subconscious message to you and to them that you're not invested, in the conversation. Because when you're into a conversation and into a person, you're facing them. Your hips are facing them, your feet are facing them. This is where you are, right? Whereas if you're facing everything out here, this is the direction you're going. And so at some level, they get that too, and they can't hook you because you're reminding yourself that you're moving in that direction, that you're not going to get hooked in this conversation. You're not going to start talking to this person or leave yourself open to that. Okay. So the person from before, the divorce. Yes. And I'm getting a divorce, and the petitioner, and he never expecting me doing it to get me back. He said, is his in fear for his safety because of jealousies. Sorry, English is not my first language, but back to the question, should I be present in the negotiation in terms of the divorce? Okay, no problem about your English. Your English is probably much better than my whatever language you speak. If you have the option, right, to be in the room or not be in the room, and in no way does that create any kind of negative, repercussion on your case. If your attorney tells you it makes no difference, right? If you have that option and it's not going to make a difference, then I would not be present with him, because being in that room is going to just trigger your nervous system, your body, to react to that. Just smelling him, seeing him, feeling his presence, like all of that is just going to trigger all the trauma from the past. So if you could do this with no negative repercussions from separate rooms, I would do that. That's what I would do. If I were you, I would listen to your intuition. If you feel like that feels like the easier situation, that feels more comfortable, and nothing negative will happen because of that in terms of the case or whatever, then listen to that. If you feel like for whatever reason you need to stand up in the courtroom in front of him and own it and project the vibe like you are not going to intimidate me, if you need to do that for your self-confidence, knowing that it's safe and that there's attorneys and the whole thing, then you can do that, if that feels safe to you. But if it doesn't feel safe to you, I wouldn't take the chance, because of the physiological reaction that will happen. Like consciously, you might think, this is a piece of cake, I got this, no problem. But it could be that when you get into the room, it just triggers everything, and your conscious mind can't override that, because it's the natural response to it. So if you have the opportunity, I would opt out of being in the room together. Really happy to hear that you're getting your divorce so you can be free. He's not expecting you to do it. He said, this is fear. Yeah. So, if he's not expecting you to do it, he might be really angry. It's like when you put an animal in a cage, right? And the animal gets really mad, and then you open that cage door and the animal, attacks, right? So because it sounds like, he wasn't expecting this either. It might just be so much more safer for you to not be in that room. If that's an option and that's safe and your attorney tells you that's okay, then I would probably go with that one. Okay. Someone says, she disqualified herself from my life. Breaking up with her was the toughest decision I've made, though I've grown from this experience, and I'm so excited to continue working on myself, becoming better, stronger, happier, as well as meeting someone new who is healthy and positive. Okay, good. Yeah, that's the hardest part, right? It's like finally getting up the courage to make that decision to leave, and you did it. Like that is the hardest part. And that's awesome. And it sounds like you're growing now from this, and you're excited to be working on yourself and looking positively toward the future. Those are all really healthy prognoses. Okay. So the person from before, sorry, I meant to say, what was the point to keep it hidden? Yes, our relationship lasted only 6 weeks and flipped on me on a dime. Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe I did go back to that then. Yeah, we already went over that. Is it common for narcissists to say they love you, but then after say they only meant it at the time? My ex said I was her best relationship and then said it was a mistake and it didn't mean anything to her. Why did they switch like that? That's a cruel joke. But quite likely she doesn't have the capacity to truly love another human being. She might love pizza and beer and sex and things like that, think she loves them, but quite likely she doesn't know what it is to love another human being. Quite likely she has an attachment disorder and it doesn't allow her to do that, and quite likely when she said she loved you, it was a manipulation. I have met narcs like this, who within weeks said that they loved me and it hooked me. It triggered me at the time. Now I recognize that. I see what that was, but I see how that softened me, and it opened me to what they were going to do, to whatever demands that they had. And they didn't really mean it. Like, how do you love someone in 2 weeks? No, that's not really, there could be infatuation. That's not love. Like, love is like trust in a relationship built over time. That's not love, So quite likely when she said it, it was just to manipulate you. It wasn't because she actually felt it. She contradicted all of these statements within 2 weeks. Yeah, quite likely. They're walking contradictions. They say the only thing consistent about them is their inconsistency. They flip-flop back and forth. One day they really, really believe in this thing and they're really into this thing and they're idolizing this thing. And then a day later, a week later, a month later, they hate that thing and that thing's just like the worst thing ever. And you're like, huh? And so it's just such a mind fuck what they do. And then when they play with your feelings like that, with the I love you, that's really sad, because you probably felt that and you probably got hooked into that, because it was a manipulation and it probably worked to pull you in, to another level of things. And then, on top of it, for her to tell you that she never mentioned it was a mistake, it kind of leaves you feeling like it was your fault or like you weren't worthy of love or something. And all of that's bullshit. So, don't worry about that. You are fully worthy of love. You are fully deserving of love, and you are definitely able to experience that with someone else. It's just that that person used I love you as a manipulation. Someone asked here, the narc abuse begged the question, why was I so open to this abuse? I've opened that box and have begun to feel the historic abuse that I have successfully lived with since childhood. I'm accepting that my previous normal was really living with the low simmering presence of PTSD and an overzealous drive to work hard and please. Do narcs not only have the ability to detect their victims' conscientiousness, but also their or my innermost wounds? At 57, I'm recovering, but I've never felt so deconstructed and fragile. Yeah, so, okay, it's good. There's multiple layers in here. It's good that you're looking into what made you open to that, right? And it's good that you're discovering there's an historic pattern here and it goes back to childhood. And that's why it was the early childhood programming. So when you can identify and put your finger on it, now you've got something to work with, right? Now, because before it was just like, what was wrong? It was like this nebulous thing and you couldn't put your finger on it, right? Now that you can identify and put your finger on it, now you know what you can work with. Right. And so looking into like, what were those conditionings exactly? What were those programmings? What are the belief systems you currently still have that are still part of that old paradigm? So how do you hunt down your belief systems? You find them in your inner dialogue, because your inner dialogue is a constant inventory of your belief systems. All the thoughts that you're having, all the self-talk, all of that. It's like your belief systems are reinforcing themselves, like they're just telling you what you believe in, right? So if you pay attention, if you become mindful of your inner dialogue, like what are you always thinking about? Like what thoughts are you always having? How do you talk to yourself in your head, right? Because how you're talking to yourself in your head probably has something to do with how other people are treating you. And so if you can hunt those down, then the thoughts that lead you to the belief systems, which lead you to the early childhood programming, and then you can reframe all that in a positive way. You can cancel and delete the old programming, and you can reframe that in a positive way, depending on that exact belief. flip it in some positive way, overwriting those belief systems, creating affirmations, right? So not empty affirmations that are just like, something that someone is reading in a book or saying in a YouTube video, and it might sound great. You might want all that in your life, but if you try to do those affirmations, probably your subconscious is like, nah, I don't believe in any of this. None of this is real. Probably because those affirmations are just so far from your reality right now that your subconscious can't get on board. So what I found with myself is that I had to change the language in my reprogramming those belief systems. So when I was writing the affirmations that would rewrite the old belief systems, the old programming, I would have to say it in a way that my subconscious could believe it. So for example, the last time, the whole thing fell apart and I had to rebuild my life, and everything was a disaster. And I would tell myself, I wanted to say, I'm living a life that I love. And I was like, no, I'm not, because I'm nowhere near there yet. So I had to tell myself, okay, I am actively building the life that I love. Yes, my subconscious got on board with that, right? And so this was like months ago. And so I just kept reinforcing that. And it was true. My subconscious could believe it because I was taking actions in that direction. I didn't believe it yet. I wasn't totally living the life that I loved. I had no furniture and I had no money and I still felt like crap, and the PTSD flashbacks are there and the dread attacks, but still I would tell myself, I am building the life that I love. I am building the life that I love. And every time this old shit would come up in my mind, I'd be like, cancel, cancel, cancel. Or you could say delete, 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 and then reprogram it. If the belief system was, you're a failure and you're never going to do it and it's never going to work for you, you should just give up. Cancel, cancel, cancel. I am building the life that I love, or whatever your thing is, your affirmation. You might need to sculpt that a bit to find and come up with things that you can really believe in. But I would come up with some core new affirmations that you truly believe in, that you're truly doing, so that you can believe in it, to overwrite those old programs. That's how you overwrite those old belief systems and programming. And the low simmering PTSD that you mentioned, this is very often what happens is it turns into CPTSD probably because it's untreated over all this time. And then it gets compounded every time you get into another abusive situation. And, when it's just like, it's stuffed down and like you just kind of feel it revving up and then you push it back down and you kind of feel it revving up and then you push it back down, or survival kicks in and it gets pushed down. And then you get to that point in your life where like you're in a safe place, and then all of a sudden it all comes out, it was like, it's just bursting at the seams. And you might think like, oh my God, I'm so much worse now than I was all my life. But in actuality, it's just that it was all stuffed down before. And now it's coming out because you got to a place of safety. You got out of that job, or you got out of that relationship, or you moved out of that place. You're in a now a safe space, and your subconscious now recognizes that it's not a survival mode anymore. And so it starts to like let this stuff come out to the surface so you can deal with it. So that will happen. You recognizing this pattern of the overzealous drive to work hard and please. That's good that you recognize that's what you do and that's your go-to. So you probably would identify with the fawn response of the 4 F's. That's Pete Walker, his work on CPTSD. They used to call it fight or flight. Now they identify 4, and fawn being the 4th one. So read about that. You might get some insight from that. And then the question, do narcs not only have the ability to detect their victims' conscientiousness, but also their innermost wounds? Yes. Yeah, they're pre-qualifying you in an interview at the beginning, and you may not realize it. You might think they're just interested in you and they're just finding out they're interested. They want to, talk to you. And if you came from a family situation or many relationships where you felt like you were never heard, especially this will happen if you've been abused as a child and sexually abused or physically abused, especially it feels like no one wants to hear you. So even as an adult, you could still have the belief system like no one wants to hear me. And here comes the narc in shining armor, and they're like, tell me everything about you. And then you reveal everything about you, or you reveal too much about you. And now they know everything. They know the whole map of the terrain. They know exactly where your vulnerabilities are. They know exactly where your wounds are. And they're going to lift those up at first, and they're going to flatter them. and help you feel good about them. And then they're going to use those devaluation techniques to put all those things down to make you feel even worse about yourself and those wounds. So yeah, they do have that uncanny ability. And sometimes it's conscious, the really sadistic ones who plan these things. And oftentimes it's just like a subconscious or unconscious way that they intuitively know how to seek out these things. Maybe consciously, they know kind of an idea of what they're looking for, but somehow intuitively they just hone right in. You say one thing and like they read into it and they got it. They know what the wound is, So that's part of now having healthy boundaries moving forward, knowing, who it's safe to share with and what it's safe to share, and sharing slowly over time, as you're dating a new person or getting a new job and getting to know the office politics and the office, social situation and whatnot, slowly revealing yourself over time, and dealing with the inner wounds and the programming, rewriting that old programming. You're welcome. Yeah, make sense, delete and rewrite your inner code. Yeah. The person with the divorce question, okay, good. You have no desire to be present and clearly you want to end it. Okay, good. Good. Then you know what you need to do. I'm happy for you that you're getting divorced. That's awesome. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, there's no more questions in the box here, and it's 8:00 here in Portland. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you so much for attending, for sharing your questions and your comments and your experiences. And I'm sending you all a big hug. I hope to see you soon.